The Galactic Council had studied many species. They had seen conquerors build monuments to their victories. Giant statues of generals on horseback. Towers commemorating great battles. Arches celebrating successful invasions. They had seen empires build statues of their leaders. Kings and queens and emperors carved in stone. Presidents and prime ministers cast in bronze. Dictators and tyrants immortalized in marble. They had seen warriors build shrines to their heroes. Temples dedicated to fallen champions. Graves marked with swords and shields. Monuments to those who died fighting for their cause. Every species did this. Every species celebrated their victories, honored their leaders, worshipped their heroes. That was the way of the galaxy. That was the pattern. That was the law. Then they discovered Earth. The Council sent scouts to observe humans. They expected to find the same patterns. Monuments to victories. Statues of leaders. Shrines to heroes. They found something else. Something they had never seen. Humans had memorials everywhere. But not to their victories. To their losses. Statues of fallen soldiers. Not the winners. The dead. Museums of tragic events. Not glorious battles. Disasters. Tragedies. Mistakes. Days of remembrance for those lost in wars. Not celebrations of conquest. Mourning. Grief. Sorrow. The Council was confused. They studied the monuments. A statue of a soldier who had died in a war that humans lost. A museum dedicated to a massacre. A day of remembrance for civilians killed in bombings. The Council could not understand. Why do you honor those you defeated? They asked a human woman. Her name was Elena. She was old. Her hair was white. Her hands were rough. She was standing before a memorial. A wall of names. Thousands of names. The names of people who had died in a war. We did not defeat them, Elena said. They were our enemies. We fought them. They fought us. Many died. On both sides. We honor them because they were people. They had families. They had hopes. They had fears. They died. That is enough to honor. The Council was still confused. But they were your enemies. Why would you honor your enemies? Elena looked at the wall of names. She touched a name of a soldier from the other side. A soldier who had tried to kill her people. A soldier who had died trying. Because forgetting is how wars start again, she said. Remembering is how we stop them. The Council did not understand. They had never thought about war this way. War was about winning. About defeating your enemies. About being stronger. War ended when one side surrendered. When one side was destroyed. When one side won. That was the law. That was the pattern. That was the way of the galaxy. But humans saw war differently. They saw war as a tragedy. A failure. A mistake. They did not celebrate victories. They mourned losses. They did not honor their heroes. They honored their victims. They did not build monuments to their triumphs. They built monuments to their pain. Why do you remember your failures? The Council asked. Why do you display your shame? Why do you teach your children about your worst moments? Elena turned from the wall. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Because failure is how we learn. We show our children these names. We tell them these stories. We make them see what happens when hate wins. When fear wins. When we forget that enemies are also human. That is how we make sure it never happens again. The Council was silent. They had never considered that failure could be a teacher. That shame could be a lesson. That remembering pain could prevent more pain. But it is painful, said a Council member. Why would you choose to feel pain? Why would you choose to remember sadness? Elena nodded. Yes, it is painful. But pain is not our enemy. Pain is our teacher. It tells us what to avoid, what not to do, who not to become. We do not choose to feel pain. We choose to learn from it. The Council member did not understand. But he did not argue. He had seen the evidence. Human wars were fewer than other species. Human peace lasted longer. Human children were kinder. There was something in the way humans remembered that made them better. What is the secret? He asked. Elena looked at the wall of names again. Thousands of names. Thousands of stories. Thousands of lessons. The secret is that we do not see our enemies as monsters, she said. We see them as people. People who made bad choices. People who followed bad leaders. People who were afraid. People who were wrong. But still people. Still human. Still worthy of remembrance. Still worthy of grief. The Council was silent. They had spent millions of years celebrating victories, honoring heroes, forgetting failures, hiding shame. They had never considered that their way might be wrong. That celebrating victory might plant the seeds of the next war. That forgetting failure might ensure its repetition. The council created a new category. Not conquerors, not victors, not heroes, rememberers. The category meant one thing. They do not forget. They remember their victims, their enemies, their failures, their shame. They learn from them. They grow from them. They become better. The council asked Elena to speak at their headquarters. She stood before them. Simple clothes, white hair, rough hands. You asked why we honor those we defeated, she said. The answer is simple. Because they were also defeated by war, by hate, by fear. They were not our enemies. They were war's enemies, hate's enemies, fear's enemies. We honor them because they died, because they suffered, because they deserve to be remembered. Not for what they did, for what they lost. Their lives, their families, their futures. That is why we remember. That is why we build monuments. That is why we mourn. Because forgetting is how wars start again. Remembering is how they end. The council was silent. They did not fully understand. Remembering was not weakness. It was strength. Mourning was not shame. It was healing. Honoring enemies was not betrayal. It was humanity. And humanity, they were learning, was the only thing that had ever stopped a war. The only thing that ever would. The only thing worth remembering. The only thing worth building monuments to. Not victories. And that, they realized, was the greatest monument of all. Not made of stone. Made of memory. Made of learning. Made of love. Made of peace. And that was enough. That was everything. That was human. The council sent a delegation to Earth. They wanted to see the monuments for themselves. They had heard the reports but needed to understand. Why would any species build monuments to their enemies? It made no sense. It was not logical. It was not strategic. It was not the way of the galaxy. The delegation was small. A Kritha general, a Xylos scientist, a Vel elder, an Orithai diplomat. They had studied many species. They had seen monuments to victories, leaders, and heroes. They had never seen a monument to an enemy. They landed in a human city. A guide met them. Her name was Maya. She led them to a park. In the center stood a statue of a soldier. Not a human soldier. An enemy soldier from a war centuries ago. The delegation gathered around, confused. Why would you build a statue of your enemy? Asked the Kritha general. Maya looked at the statue. The soldier was young. His face was sad. He sat on a rock, looking tired and lost. He was not always our enemy, she said. He was a person. He had a family and hopes and fears. We built this statue to remind ourselves that enemies are also human. The Xylos scientist spoke. But he tried to kill your people. Why honor him? Maya touched the stone hand. We do not honor what he did. We honor who he was. He was a young man sent to fight a war he did not start. He was a son who missed his mother. He was human. We honor his humanity. The Vel elder asked, how can you separate his actions from his humanity? If we see enemies as monsters, we become monsters, Maya said. We build this statue to remember they were people who made bad choices. Still human. Still worthy of remembrance. The Orithai diplomat understood. You build statues to enemies so you do not forget they were human, so you do not repeat the same mistakes. Maya nodded. Yes, we remember that war has no winners, only survivors. Survivors have a duty to remember, learn, and become better. The Kritha general read the name on the statue. He was called Kale, 22 years old, died far from home. His sister named her first son after him. He is not forgotten. The general had killed many enemies. He had never thought of them as sons or brothers. I have never built a monument to my enemies, he said. Maya smiled gently. It is not too late. Remember them now. Mourn them now. It will not bring them back, but it might prevent future wars. The delegation stood in silence, beginning to understand. Humans had learned something the rest of the galaxy had not. Forgetting was dangerous. Dehumanizing the enemy was the first step to becoming the enemy. Remembering was how wars ended. They returned to the council. Humans build statues to their enemies to honor their humanity, they reported. They believe remembering the enemy prevents future wars. The council created a new tradition. On every planet, they built a statue to their enemies. A plaque read, "We remember you. You are human. You are not forgotten. We will become better." It was not easy. Many species resisted. But slowly, statues appeared across the galaxy. Wars became fewer. Peace became longer. Children became kinder. Because humans had shown that the first step to peace was remembrance. They build statues to their enemies. They honor the fallen. They remember that enemies are human. They learn. They grow. They become better. That is the human way. That is the only way that works. And that is enough. The delegation visited a museum. They had seen the statue of the enemy soldier and begun to understand, but they needed to see more. The guide, Maya, took them to a different place. A museum. Not of victories or heroes. A museum of a war that humans had lost. A war that had killed millions. The building was large, simple, and gray. No statues of generals. No flags. No celebrations. Just a quiet, somber building. The delegation entered. The halls were dark. The walls were covered with black and white photographs. Faces of the dead. Soldiers, civilians, children, old people. Thousands of faces. Millions of faces. The delegation walked slowly. They did not speak. The Kritha general stopped before a photograph of a young soldier. His uniform was torn. His face was bloody. His eyes were empty. Who was he? The general asked. Maya looked at the photograph. His name was Kale. He was 19. He did not want to fight. He died alone in a field. One of millions. The Xylos scientist studied a photograph of a woman holding a crying child. Her face was blank. No tears left. No hope left. Her name was Elena, Maya said. She lost her husband, son, daughter, and home. She became a teacher. She taught children the truth about the war. She made sure they never forgot. The Vel elder looked at a display case. Inside was a faded, handwritten letter. Dear Mother, I am scared. I do not know if I will come home. I am sorry I was not a better son. Please do not forget me. Your son, Kale. The elder's hands shook. He had lived for thousands of years. He had never read a letter so honest and sad. Why do you display your failures? The elder asked. Why show children these pictures of pain? Why not hide them and forget? Maya led them to a large room filled with school children. They sat on the floor, listening to an old teacher with white hair and rough hands. She told a story about the war, the millions who died, the mistakes that killed them. The delegation sat in the back and listened. The teacher showed a photograph of a pile of bodies. The children did not look away. They did not cry. They just looked and learned. Why show them this? The Orathai diplomat whispered. They are children. Maya shook her head. They must know. If we hide the truth, they will not understand. If we forget the past, we will repeat it. These children will grow up to be leaders. We want them to know what war really is. Not glory. Not victory. Death, suffering, loss. That is war. That is what we show them. That is how we make sure they never choose it. The delegation was silent. Other species taught children about glorious battles and heroic sacrifices. They hid the worst parts. They created a version of war that was not real. That led to more war. We hide our failures, the Vel elder said. We do not want our children to see us as weak or wrong. We want them to see us as victorious. Maya nodded. That is why you keep having wars. You hide your mistakes. You forget them. You repeat them. We display our failures. We learn from them. Our wars are fewer. Our peace lasts longer. Our children are kinder. After the lesson, a young girl approached the Kritha general. Did you fight in a war? She asked. The general was surprised. Yes. Did you kill people? He hesitated. Yes. The girl nodded. My grandfather fought in a war. He killed people too. He never talked about it. He was sad all the time. He just sat in his chair and looked out the window until he died. The general was silent. He had killed hundreds of enemies. He had never thought about their families or grief. What was your grandfather's name? He asked. Elena. Like the teacher. She was named after her grandmother who lost everything. The general knelt down. I will remember your grandfather. I will try to be better. To prevent more wars. The girl hugged him. The general had never been hugged by a child. He stood still, then hugged her back. Gently. The delegation left the museum in silence. The general spoke first. I have fought for centuries. I have killed hundreds. I never thought of them as people. I never thought of their families. I was wrong. The Xylos scientist agreed. We have taught our children lies. Glorious lies that lead to more war. We were wrong. The Vel elder nodded. We preserved only the parts that made us look good. We hid our shame. We did not learn. We were wrong. The Orathi diplomat said, "We adapted to survive but not to grow. We never learned to mourn our enemies. We were wrong." They returned to the council. "Humans display their failures and teach their children the truth about war," they reported. "They do not hide their shame. They learn from it and become better. That is why their wars are fewer and their children kinder." The council created a new tradition. On every planet, they built a museum of war. Not of victories, but of losses, failures, and shame. They filled them with photographs, letters, and stories. They invited children to visit. They told them the truth about war's horrors. It was hard. Many species resisted. But slowly, museums appeared across the galaxy. Wars became fewer. Peace became longer. Children became kinder. Not because of weapons, but because of truth and memory. Humans had shown that the first step to peace was not victory but honesty. And honesty, the galaxy finally learned, was the only thing that had ever stopped a war. The only thing that ever would. Museums of failure. Statues of enemies. Truth for children. That was the human way. That was enough. That was everything. That was peace. The delegation attended a day of remembrance. They had seen the statue of the enemy soldier and visited the Museum of War. They had begun to understand, but they needed to see more. Maya took them to a large field with green grass and tall trees. In the center stood a long stone wall covered with names. Thousands of names. Millions of names. "It is called the Wall of Remembering," Maya said. "Every year, on this day, we come here. We light candles. We read names. We cry." The delegation walked along the wall. They saw names of soldiers, civilians, children, old people, humans, and enemies. The Kritha general stopped at a name from his own planet. A soldier who had died fighting against humans. "Why is his name here?" the general asked. "He was your enemy. He tried to kill your people." Maya touched the name. He was not our enemy. He was a soldier following orders. Far from home. Scared. He died alone. He deserved to be remembered. The general had known that soldier. They had trained together. He had never thought humans would remember him. The Xylo scientist saw a name from her planet. A scientist who developed weapons that killed thousands. "Why is her name here?" she asked. "She made weapons that killed your people." Maya looked at the name. She was trying to protect her people. She was wrong. But she was human. She deserved to be remembered for who she was, not what she did. The Vel Elder saw the name of a leader who started the war. "Why is his name here?" "He was evil." "We do not honor him," Maya said. "We remember him. We do not forget what he did. But we remember he was also someone's child. We remember him so we do not become him." The Orathi diplomat read names from her own planet. Tears came to her eyes. She had never cried for enemies before. "Why do you mourn those who tried to kill you?" she asked. An old woman stood beside her, holding a candle. "Because they were also someone's children. They died. That is enough to mourn. We mourn their humanity, not their cause. But they tried to destroy you." The old woman touched a name on the wall. "My son died in the war. He was 20. Drafted. Scared. Killed by an enemy soldier. That soldier was also young and scared. He died too. His mother mourns him, just like I mourn my son. We are the same. Both mothers who lost children. We mourn together. Not the cause. The loss. The humanity." The diplomat began to cry. She had never cried for a stranger. But now she cried for all the names on the wall. The delegation stood at the wall as the sun set. Thousands of candles flickered. Humans read names for hours. Names of their soldiers. Names of enemy soldiers. Names of civilians and children. They did not stop. They remembered. The Kritha general read a name of a soldier he had killed. He had never thought about that soldier as a person. Now he did. He mourned him. He cried. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I will remember you now." The Xylo scientist read the name of the weapon maker. She was wrong. She caused suffering. But she was human. I remember her. I mourn her. The Vel Elder read the leader's name. He was wrong and evil. But he was human. I remember him. I will not become him. The Orathi diplomat read many names. We hid our failures and celebrated victories. We taught our children lies. We did not remember or mourn. We kept having wars. We can change. We can remember. We can become better. The delegation returned to the council. Humans mourn their enemies, they reported. They light candles for those who tried to kill them. They read names of those who caused them pain. They believe enemies are also human. Someone's children. Someone's parents. They mourn the humanity, not the cause. The council created a new tradition. On every planet, they established a day of remembrance. They lit candles, read names of their own soldiers and enemy soldiers. They cried. They mourned. They remembered. It was hard. Many species resisted. But slowly, the tradition spread across the galaxy. Wars became fewer. Peace became longer. Children became kinder. Not because of weapons or walls. Because of remembrance and mourning. Humans had shown that the first step to peace was not victory. It was mourning for the dead, even enemies. And mourning, the galaxy learned, was the only thing that had ever stopped a war. Candles lit for enemies. Names read for strangers. Tears cried for the fallen. That was the human way. That was enough to prevent more death. That was the only victory that mattered. A victory over war, over hate, over forgetting. A victory for humanity. And that was everything. The delegation returned to the council. They had traveled across the galaxy. They had seen the statue of the enemy soldier, the museum of war, the wall of remembering, the day of mourning. They had learned something. Something the council had never understood. Something that changed everything. They stood before the council chamber. Representatives from 100 species gathered. The room was silent. The delegation leader, an Orithai diplomat named Lyra, spoke. Humans do not build monuments to their victories, she said. They build monuments to their victims. They do not celebrate their defeats of enemies. They mourn the loss of life. They do not forget. They remember. And remembering, they believe, is the only way to prevent the same mistakes. The council was silent. They had spent millions of years celebrating victories, honoring heroes, forgetting failures, hiding shame. They had never considered another way. But the humans had shown them. Not with arguments. With stone. With names. With tears. The Kritha general spoke. He had been part of the delegation. He had seen the statue of the enemy soldier. He had visited the museum. He had stood at the wall. He had lit a candle. He had read names. He had cried. I have fought in many wars, he said. I have killed many enemies. I have never mourned them. I have never remembered them. I have never thought of them as people. I was wrong. The humans taught me that enemies are also human. That they were also someone's children. Someone's parents. Someone's friends. They died. That is enough to mourn. Not the cause. The humanity. The Xylo scientist spoke. She had been part of the delegation. She had cried with mothers who lost sons. We have always hidden our failures, she said. We have always celebrated our victories. We have never taught our children the truth. We have taught them lies. Glorious lies. Honorable lies. Lies that lead to more war. The humans taught us that failure is how we learn. That shame is how we grow. That remembering the worst parts of our history is how we prevent them from happening again. The Vel elder spoke. He had been part of the delegation. He had read the letter. The young soldier writing to his mother. Saying goodbye. Saying sorry. Saying remember me. We have preserved the past, he said. But we have preserved only the parts that made us look good. The parts that made us feel proud. That teaching our children about shame is not cruelty. It is kindness. That remembering the worst parts of our history is the only way to become better. The Orithai diplomat spoke. She had been part of the delegation. She had stood at the wall. She had lit a candle. She had read names. She had cried for enemies. For strangers. For the dead. We have always celebrated victories, she said. We have always honored heroes. We have never mourned our enemies. We have never remembered the dead on the other side. The humans taught us that mourning is not weakness. It is humanity. That remembering is not painful. It is healing. That honoring our enemies is not betrayal. It is peace. The council was silent. They had never considered any of this. But the evidence was before them. Human wars were fewer. Human peace lasted longer. Human children were kinder. There was something in the way humans remembered that made them better. The council president spoke. He was old. He had seen many wars. He had celebrated many victories. He had forgotten many failures. He had hidden much shame. What do we do now? He asked. The delegation leader, Lyra, smiled. We build monuments, she said. Not to our victories. To our victims. We remember. We learn. We become better. The council voted. The vote was close. Many species resisted. They did not want to build monuments to their enemies. On every planet, they built a monument. Not a statue of a general on horseback. Not an arch celebrating a victory. Not a shrine to a hero. A wall. A simple wall. With names. Names of the dead. All the dead. Their own soldiers. Enemy soldiers. Civilians. Children. Old people. All of them. On every planet, they established a day of remembrance. On that day, they lit candles. Many species struggled. Many did not want to mourn their enemies. Many did not want to read the names of those who tried to destroy them. But slowly, the tradition spread. On Kritha. On Xylos. On Vel. On Orathai. On 100 worlds. Monuments to victims. Days of remembrance. Candles. Names. Tears. Mourning for enemies. Mourning for strangers. Mourning for the dead. Mourning for humanity. The final scene takes place at the council headquarters. A new plaque hangs on the wall. Simple. Wooden. Carved with words. The words that a human woman had spoken. The words that had changed everything. We asked humans why they honor their enemies. They said, because forgetting is how wars start. Remembering is how they end. We did not understand. Now we do. A young alien stands before the plaque. She is Orathai. She was not born when the delegation traveled to Earth. She has grown up in the new galaxy. The galaxy of remembering. The galaxy of mourning. The galaxy of peace. She turns to an old council member. Her kind eyes. Her words. Forgetting is how wars start. Remembering is how they end. We build monuments, he says. Not to our victories. To our victims. We remember. We learn. We become better. That is what we do now. That is what we will always do. Not because it is easy. Because it is right. Because it is human. Because it is the only way. The young alien nods. She walks to the window. She looks at the stars. She thinks about the humans. The strange species that built statues to their enemies. That displayed their failures. That mourned their enemies. That remembered. That learned. That became better. She smiles. She will build monuments. She will light candles. She will read names. She will cry. She will remember. She will learn. She will become better. Not because she is strong. Because she is human. Not in body. In heart. And the galaxy continues. Wars become fewer. Peace becomes longer. Children become kinder. Not because of weapons. Not because of walls. Because of monuments. Victims. Enemies. The dead. Because remembering them is the only way to prevent them. And preventing them is the only victory that matters. The only victory worth celebrating. A victory over war. A victory over hate. A victory over forgetting. A victory for humanity. And that is enough. That is everything. That is human. That is peace. That is the answer.